Hey there, welcome back to the Path to Zion podcast, where we are rediscovering the ancient way. Thank you for joining us here today as we continue to move through our latest series titled The Most High Remembers His Covenant. And what an incredible thing that is. I love to talk about. In between the last part and this one, I had an hour-long conversation with a couple people about this topic right here. Just some questions about, well, who are we? And if we're this, and if Hebrews says this, then what does this mean for Deuteronomy? And friends, what an incredible gift it is to have other people in our life who are hungry for truth and are willing to look at the Word, to look at the Scriptures, to look at the Old Covenant, Newer Covenant, and all of that, the whole thing, and say, I want to understand the gospel. I want to understand the function of the Son of Elohim. I want to understand the new covenant promises. I want to understand the covenantal promises made to Abraham and how it all works together. And that's what we're doing here on this series, The Most High Remembers His Covenant. We did the introduction and set the stage, talking about how Moses arrived on the scene, sent by Yahweh to be a mediator, redeemer, to deliver Yahweh's set-apart people from oppression. In the last part one, was we looked at the Hebrew understanding of this word shavah, which is a cry for help, and how the Hebrews in their oppression, they groaned, they cried, and they cried out, and Yahweh heard, and Yahweh saw them, and Yahweh took notice, and most importantly, Yahweh responded to them based upon his covenant to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so now we're going to talk about part 2, a covenant that's bigger than us all. A covenant bigger than us all, friends. So we're going to go back to our primary text, and we're going to keep going over it every time, establishing why this discussion matters to us here today in this epoch of time's version of being a follower of Messiah, a believer in the Most High, and one's trying to be sure that we are his set-apart covenantal people. Again, Exodus chapter 2, verses 23 through 25. It came about in the course of those many days that the king of Egypt died, and the sons of Israel groaned because of the bondage, and they cried out. And their cry for help, their shavah, because of their bondage, this ascended to Elohim. So Elohim heard their groaning, and Elohim remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And concluding in verse 25, he saw the sons of Israel, and he took notice of them. Now, I want to point out that this is yet another discussion that demands that we properly understand our identity and the importance of a covenantal relationship between the Most High and his people. And if we cling tightly to the text, we see that Yahweh heard the cry of his people, and he responded because of who they were more than because of what they did. Okay? I want to talk about that here for the next few moments as we talk about a covenant bigger than us all, that according to the text, I would say, and many others that we're going to go over as we progress through this series, Yahweh responded and heard their cry. He heard their cry, and he responded to it with action because of who they were more than because of what they did. Okay? Covenant is all over this discussion here, of course. And I'd like to promote that this was not as much about what the Israelites did do in this case as it was what Yahweh did for them. It wasn't so much that they cried out for help as much as what Yahweh did on the behalf of a covenant that preceded them for his name's sake. Okay, we got to keep coming back to this main point here. Because the covenant with their fathers and for his great name's sake, he moved on their behalf and responded to their crying out for help. So again, Elohim heard their groaning and he remembered his covenant. Yes, he heard. He did. Okay, he heard a cry for help. But what caused him to act? It would seem, according to the text, if we are willing to see it, was it how the people groaned and how they cried out? Was it that specifically? Was it their oppression that they were under? Was it, unjust treatment that they were receiving? Was it Yahweh's pity that he looked down and had compassion clearly on this text here that moved him to act. I believe that we must stop and make sure that we understand this, that Yahweh remembered his covenant with their fathers. Even as Yahweh announced himself to Moses at the beginning of Exodus chapter 3, he clearly stated that he was, quote, the Elohim of his father. Remember Amram, who had the vision, the visitation, and the prophecy that he was going to have sons that would liberate the Hebrew people and overthrow the Egyptians? So Yahweh's saying, I'm the Elohim of your father, Moses, and of Abraham, and of Isaac, and of Jacob. And so Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at him. He was filled with fear. Why? I know this God of my fathers. He is an incredible, awesome, mighty one. He is the Most High. He is the one above all others. And he was meeting with Moses at this incredible encounter experience that Moses had. For what? For covenant to be established throughout the land of his set-apart people, to set them free. Why? For his great name's sake, not just for Moses to experience personal salvation, but for the good of a people in a covenantal expression of himself. For his great name's sake, Yahweh said, I will do this on behalf of this covenant that I have established. Now, we've been invited into this ancient covenant. It's traveled through all these generations and beyond. It will go beyond us, which is why there's an incredible call that's so lacking in the body today of generational legacy and a heritage where fathers train their children and those children train their children in the way that we should walk. Now it's just a big old faith free-for-all. You believe what you want. I'm not going to challenge you. I'm not going to correct you. I'm not going to bring the word to you and give you instruction and counsel. It's every man for himself now. We don't believe like that, but hey, it's your family. Just go and teach them the best you think. And everybody is just living these individual lives, promoting an individual-based, personal, experiential gospel. And we've forgotten, friend. We've forgotten that Yahweh remembers his covenant, which is he wants a people. He wants a marked, set-apart, holy people, okay? Moses understood this. These Hebrews that we have in our main text in Exodus chapter 2, they understood that. They understood their heritage, and they remembered to cry out, okay, shavah, to Yahweh for help. So as I spent more and more time about this, I realized that we've heard these words a lot in our Christian lives about being grafted in. Do we really understand what we're saying? Because it would seem that we're grafted into all the blessings of Israel, but we're not Jews, so we don't do that. I can eat pork. Jesus is my Sabbath now, even though the fourth commandment doesn't talk about some condition of Sabbath. It talks about a day. It talks about a literal day, but we don't talk about that. I'm not a Jew. Just like my phone call I referenced a few moments ago, we got into that discussion about the law preceded the Jews. Okay? The commandments, the instructions, the statutes of Yahweh precede the Jews. This is not a Mount Sinai only event. And we'll get to that when we talk about the seed of Abraham part of this series. We're talking about something that is generational, friend, that has gone on and on and on, that we've been invited into. Now, I am saying that the act of the Israelites crying out for help did play a role. Yes, that is an important, integral part that we cannot just cast aside. But I would suggest that, however, it is a minor one in light of everything else. After all, a cry out for help when you're in distress means nothing if there's no one near to hear and to respond with aid. Okay? Crying out for help is great. But the most important part about crying out for help is that there's someone, to use the word from earlier, it ascended to Yahweh's throne, and he heard, And he looked and he saw and he noticed and he took notice of them. He paid mind to them. And then he moved on their behalf. It incited him to remember his covenant with their fathers. So that being said, we have already talked about shavah and how we, according to the Hebrew text, realize that the Israelites did cry out to Yahweh. I wasn't sure at first. I had to dig that out. But if you cling to that, the Hebrew text alone, and not the many, many, many translation options, I feel that it's very important that we do remember that they did cry out. They did make their cry known to Yahweh. This reminds us today that Yahweh hears the cries for help from his covenant people. Again, are we sure that we have entered into an ancient covenant that is beyond us? Okay? We're talking about something that doesn't go back to the base of Mount Sinai. Okay? This is one of the 400,000 things that we can say about when people say, I'm not a Jew. We can just calmly and kindly say, you're not understanding what I'm saying. This is not a Jewish versus a Christian world here. We're talking about I've said this for the last however many years on this program specifically. There's two types of people in covenant and people not in covenant with Yahweh. When you come up to me and say, are you saved, brother? It's really not about that. Am I in covenant with the Creator or am I not? Okay? So are we sure that we've entered into this ancient generational covenant that is beyond us, bigger than us? And what do we need to do now because of this covenant if in fact we are within it? Yahweh responds to the cry of his covenantal people. But friend, it is not merely only about you. And it's sure not just only about me. This is a familial covenant that Yahweh has invited anyone who will come in the way he says. Now, we talk a lot about Yeshua, the Son, being the door. He is the door to the Father, okay? But there are covenantal responsibilities that we have to get our mind set on and realize that is on the at the most elementary approach. That is what a covenant is. So we have been invited into a covenant so much bigger and greater and beyond us, and even beyond the Hebrews, the Israelites in Egypt in slavery and oppression, friend. It was bigger than them too. And that's what I hope to get through with this very short part of this series. I want to get through our heads that even the Israelite people, the enslaved Hebrews in Egypt, were remembered because of a covenant that was way bigger than them. Because again, friend, this precedes the Mount Sinai event. This precedes the Mount Sinai event that we always want to go back to for the giving of the law. We will talk more about that when we talk about the seed of Abraham and what Abraham did. That was a marker for a man who had entered covenant with Yahweh. So we continue to talk about how the Most High remembers his covenant. We're so thankful that he does because guess what, friend? You and I forget. Humanity again and again and again is a forgetful people. But let's change that pattern, right? Let's change that pattern. Let's be a people who stop and remember and ask these hard questions about like, am I in covenant? And if I am, what in the world do I need to do about it? Thank you so much for watching. This is the Path to Zion podcast. We're rediscovering the ancient way. We will be back for part 3. Those who Yahweh does and does not hear. Coming up after this. Amen.